question then becomes, why should there be an obvious way to play the game? Consider the following 4 reasons why there might be an obvious way to play the game. Focal point. Cultural and historical factors can not only coordinate expectations between multiple Nash equilibria, but they might also coordinate expectations on the Nash equilibrium strategies. 2. Self-enforcing agreements. Suppose that the players in the game can communicate prior to making their moves, but still cannot make binding agreements. Then the only agreements that will survive the playing of the game are agreements to play Nash equilibrium strategies. Only in Nash equilibria will no player have an incentive to deviate and break the agreement. 3. Stable social conventions. Whether we walk on the right or left on the sidewalk or an escalator is a social convention. Ignoring how such conventions develop, we know that they are unlikely to persist if there are not Nash equilibria, because players will have an incentive to deviate. Once all pedestrians have decided to walk on the right side of the sidewalk, anyone deviating would be knocked over. So this convention does not have the Nash equilibrium property. Rationality, for number 4, rationality determines the obvious equilibrium. It has been suggested that, in fact, rationality should result in the Nash equilibrium strategies being played. Rational players who have the same information about the game and know that each other is rational should all agree on how the game will be played. To see this, note that the justifications for playing rationalizable strategies that are not part of a Nash equilibrium are inconsistent. In the game of figure 7.6, the justifications for R1 and R3 are supported by beliefs by player 1 that player 2 expects that 1 will do something that 1 does not intend to do. For instance, R1 is supported by the conjecture of player 1 that 2 intends to play C3 on the basis that 2 believes that 1 is actually going to play R3. Rationality suggests that players should understand that these justifications are inconsistent and therefore rule them out. On the other hand, they should be able to determine that the justifications for the Nash equilibrium strategies are consistent. In the justification for R2, player 1 conjectures that 2 is going to play C2 because 2 expects 1 to play R2. Not only are the conjectures reasonable or justifiable, they are also consistent. Player 1's beliefs regarding 2's expectations of 1's behavior are consistent with player 1's intentions. More concretely, the issue comes down to whether or not it makes sense for players to try to fool their opponent into thinking that they are going to do one thing when they in fact plan to do something else. Do rational players think that their opponent might make an error and thus can be manipulated or tricked into making such an error? The issue can be highlighted by considering the game of chess. Chess players are clearly masters of strategic thinking. However, while chess masters do respect the rationality and ability of fellow chess masters, they try and win by inducing their opponent to make errors. Zermelo, in 1913, derived an algorithm that suggests that the game of chess is trivial since it should always end with the same result. All games of chess should result in only one of the following: white should always win, black should always win, or the game should always end in a draw. Clearly, if this were the case, then chess would not be a very popular game. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your views of chess. It remains a very popular game since it is not possible to determine, using the algorithm, what unique equilibrium actually is. The algorithm just suggests that it in fact exists. The outcome of any game of chess clearly depends on the relative ability of the players. On the other hand, the lack of interest that anyone over the age of 10 or so has in tic-tac-toe probably does arise from the fact that every game of tic-tac-toe should end in a draw. Attempts to induce an error by your opponent should not be possible. The game is sufficiently simple that assuming that a player's knowledge of the rules and ability to play are equal and perfect is appropriate. And this is precisely the assumption implicit in game theoretic analysis. Game theoretic modeling assumes that the player's knowledge of the rules and ability to analyze are not only equal, but perfect. Whether or not rationality suggests an obvious way to play the game seems to depend then on the relationship between the complexity of the game and the abilities of the players. Rationality